Hi there, and welcome to the first of our PodsCast number 1 from the Pods Framework, airing live on March 2nd, 2015. We'll be hosting these podcasts on the first and third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Without further ado, go ahead and start playing for us, Mr. Scott Clark.
Yeah, so I figured I'd just play a little, light song, just to lighten the mood here. We're gonna go into some pretty cool stuff. In the end, don't worry, be happy, right? Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it note for note. Don't worry, be happy. In every life we have some trouble. When you worry, you make it double. Don't worry. Use WordPress. It's a little ditty.
And so with that, let's go ahead and start introducing our team here. I think most of you guys probably know us, but just in case you don't, we'll go ahead and start introducing us anyway. You just heard from Scott Clark. He's the lead developer at the Pods Framework. Scott, you want to give a couple words about yourself?
Yeah, I like to develop PHP and work with WordPress and deal with all of the fun stuff with databases. I work with 10up, a great team of people who enables me to do lots of cool stuff on the side, like the WordPress Fields API that I'm working on for WordPress core. It's a proposal to unite all the APIs and do stuff with pods and my other plugins. So it's a great situation. And I like to play music, of course, and I like Doctor Who, as you can see behind me, and all over the office, and on my guitar strap. So.
And we also have Josh Pollock. He is our community manager for Pods Framework and one of our primary developers as well. Josh, go ahead and tell us a little about yourself.
Hello, I'm Josh Pollock. I am community manager and contributing developer for Pods. I also write for the Torque magazine, a publication of WP Engine, and I am the guy slash other developer for Caldera WP. We sell WordPress plugins. So that's a little bit about me. I live in the great state of Florida with 2 dogs, 2 cats, and my wonderful wife.
Cool. I'm Jim True. I'm the current support manager or support framework guy for Pods Framework, and I'm the project manager for a lot of our projects as well. Since this is our very first podcast, wanted to let you know a little bit about how the framework's going to work. We'll be taking live questions throughout the PodsCast. You can get to us 2 different ways. You can send us a tweet over at the Pods Framework with the hashtag PodsCast, PODSCAST. You can also join us on our Slack chat at http://pods.io/chat and post a question in the PodsCast channel. And without any further ado, go ahead and I'm going to turn this over to Josh, who can start telling us about finding our way with Pods Find.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And thanks everybody for watching. What we're talking about today is Pods Find, and Pods Find is essentially our version of WP Query. It's your PHP API for getting data from your pods. No matter how you're getting your pods content, whether you're using a pods shortcode, you're using a pods template, somewhere if you go far enough back in the code, it's going to get to Pods Find. Of course, if your pod is a custom post type with meta storage, you could just use WP Query. But any other type of pod, you do need to use pods, the pods class and find. And also it has some really neat advanced features as far as helping you build the underlying SQL query that goes into getting your data. So we wanted to go through some of the things about the pods find method. Of course, pods find is a method of the pods class, but the way that we generally use it is with the function pods. And if you look at that function, what it does is it builds a new object of the pods class, and then it passes parameters to pods find, right? The first argument is what pod, the second one is parameters, and that goes down to the pods find method. And the pods find method is just so complicated that it can be a little confusing sometimes to understand how it works, especially with the where queries, because you can be querying so many different types of pods, different types of fields. So what we're going to go through today is a little bit of an overview of what it does and understanding that giant green chart in the pods find docs, walking you through exactly how you can read that chart, because it does actually have all of the answers for your where queries. And that's what we're going to be talking the most about today is your where query. I want to get pod items from this pod where something, where this meta field is equal to that, or where this custom field is greater than that, these sorts of things. So we're going to go through that, and we'll touch on some other things that you can do with pods find parameters, such as caching and these sorts of things. And there's a lot of different things that you could do, including traversals. So let's go into that chart. I'm going to share my screen here. And I have this is the pods find docs here. And we've got a lot of examples here that you can see, but most importantly is this big green chart. And it kind of has to be this big. Be a little
Hey, Josh, can you
Jim?
zoom in your screen just a tad for that one?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
No problem.
What's important about this chart is that when you're writing a where query, and we'll show you in a little bit how those are done if you're not familiar with them, it's important to know how to prefix. You can't just say where post title equals hello world. You have to know exactly how to get WordPress to the right table to know which which column in what table to look at. And that's where these prefixes that you see here come from. There are a lot of them, and so that's why we're going to start with how do you actually get into this chart. This chart is read both. You need to figure out which one of these columns you need to be using, and then which one of these rows, which one of these rows you need to use based on your content type, and then which column you need to use based on your field type. So the first thing that you need to do is figure out which one of these columns is relevant to me. And that's what type of pod do I have? Do I have a post type pod? Did I extend posts or pages or media? Did I create a custom post type pod? So then you'd be in this column here. Is my pod a taxonomy, including extended categories or tags, or a custom taxonomy? So then you're in this column. Did I extend users? Then we're in this column. Did I extend comments? Then I'm in this column. Or did I create an advanced content type? That would be when you're using our advanced content types component that lets you use a custom table, then we need to be in this column. Once you know which one of these columns, you need to figure out which row you're in. And that involves saying what type of field is this. So oftentimes you just need the ID that has its own one. And you can see it's pretty similar across the board. That you use this T dot, the name of your column. T also handles for post types any sort of built-in field. So T dot post title, T dot post author, T dot post modified date, these sorts of things. With post types, you have two basic types of fields. If it's a meta storage field, you have your relationship fields, that's these two columns, and then you also have your custom fields. Now, a custom field, of course, if you're using the table storage, can be using table-based storage. So you see that here. Sorry, the animation is going to be an issue. Or you can have meta-based storage. And with these relationship fields, this is where this gets a little tricky to read. And I always like to think about this because you see there's something here, there's a dot, and then there's something here on this side. And I always like to read this as the field that the relationship is from, and then what it is to, from dot to. So the left side is where the relationship is coming from, and then on the right side, what it's to, that's the field and whatever it's related to. So if I have two post types that are related, and I want to know a related post whose post title equals hello world, I need to say, what is the name of this related field name? And I put that on the left side of the dot. and then what's my field that I want to actually run the query on for matches. So that's on the right side, that's post title. So if my field name was related post, I would say related post dot post title. Now, if it's a meta storage field, these are the storage is actually happening in the post meta table. In WordPress, this can be a little confusing sometimes because there's not one row per item. There's one row per field. But what we're doing here is if we had a field called soup type, we would say soup type dot meta value equals. So we're essentially saying I'm looking for a meta key, that would be the name of the field, whose meta value equals, and then whatever we're looking for. Of course, we'd have table storage. And in those cases, we use D dot the field name. And D refers to the custom table that we're using. I'm going to get my cat out of the screen. Sorry about this. Oh, we're not on screen share. So that's how you read this. And that logic can move the whole way across. If I am in a taxonomy, we do the same sort of thing. It gets a little trickier there because you can have custom fields of your taxonomy that are added using the pods table storage. And that's, again, down here. There is no meta storage for taxonomy fields. But we'd also have relationship fields. Same logic, where it's coming from, and then where it's going to. So if I have a field called type of, like I have a taxonomy called genre, and then I have genre type, like for, movies, books, film, plays. So I could, and then I could have that here on the left, and then I would want to, what am I actually matching on the right? And then again, the T dot, those are for built-in fields. So T dot term ID, T dot name for the slug. Users, it works the same basic way. T dot is the built-in fields. Then we have our relationship fields, and then our meta fields again. I have a meta field for user type, 2 types of users, special users, less special users. I can query where user type dot meta value equals special users. And we keep working across here. You'll see sometimes we do have an NA, for example, in advanced content type. There's no such thing as a taxonomy built in. We can do it through a relationship field. But then we are back up to here. And, but we, for instance, can't do there is no meta storage for an advanced custom content type. That's exactly the point. But we can do, again, the field name. Almost all of these are going, unless it's a relationship field, they're all going to be T dot. T refers to the same table that it's stored in. With advanced content type, it's all in that same table, unless it's a relationship field, in which case it uses the bridge table there. So that's why we would do related field name dot what it's related to. That's a little bit of an overview on how to read this chart. It does refer to only where queries. And so I want to get a little bit more into where queries and how they work and get into traversals. Scott, do you think you can do some live coding for us?
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Let me end my screen share.
Actually, I'd kind of like to see an example of maybe a couple of different specific ones that walk through that chart.
Yeah, Scott, why don't you write us some where queries, starting with meta storage?
Sure, 1 second here. Just pulling that up.
Because that's a bit of an abstract overview of how we're reading the chart, because it's always going to be in that form of where I'm starting and then where I'm going, even if where I'm starting is the same place, which is T dot. You two know SQL better than I do, so we really need to explain what T means. Why don't you do us
Well,
explain
and
it?
one of the questions I know we already have on this one is specifically the find query is used in both the shortcodes when you're doing like a where in the shortcode. It's used in the when you're setting up like a relationship or like a multiple drop down where you're trying to like do a where limit that list of solutions. That's also a place where the find is also popped in, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
The pod shortcode breaks out the arguments for pods find.
Mm-hmm.
Almost every argument of the pod shortcode is a parameter of pods find.
Okay.
Where, limit, cache mode, expire, which is how long that cache lasts, order by, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're focusing on where because it's the most useful, but there's also
right.
Limit is very important. Limit is how many do you need? Do you want -1? If you don't say anything, you're going to get 15. And that's per page. Or do I want to limit it to 50? Whatever you need for that. So almost all of these things that you're going to do in Pod shortcode, they're being passed down. If you look at the source code for Pod's shortcode,
Okay.
it's just building Pod's fine parameters for you. And then if you specify template, then it's calling the template method on top of that
Got it.
for your
Thank
applet.
you.
Scott, are you ready to show us some code?
Yeah, yes I am. Just setting up a couple of blank variables here I can utilize in my examples.
And so Scott's using, as we said, this is the Pod's function. When we use WP query, we're used to saying new WP query. We're building a WP query object. And in this case, this is what we're doing a little bit. If you look at Pods, it's building a new object of Pods. It's very similar to what happens when you run new WP query. It's just we give you this helper function to do it. And that way you also have forward compatibility. That way, if we change how Pods objects are built in the future for some reason, we'll make that function work with it. We can build the backwards compatibility into that function.
All right, so you guys able to see that pretty clearly?
Works for me.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm just going to go over a couple of use cases here. We've got some really cool things you can do with traversal, and I want to highlight some of the specific things for each object. Like Josh went over a bit of it through the reference table, and that's really, I would say, it's very handy. I use it often whenever I need to remember explicitly what it should be, so I can tell someone, or I can just point them to this. But it's a great thing because what makes Pods different is its traversal capabilities. So here's an example here. I'm going to go find all users with a certain set of parameters, and now this is different from WP query or WP user query. It's actually using our find API, and I'm going to say let's limit it to, let's see, get the 10. Let's order by the user login, or yeah, user login. That's good. All right, so we're going to order by user login, limit to 10 users, and then for the where, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let's go find all of the users, and a little more background on the site I'm going to propose here is this is a site like MySpace or Facebook or whatever, but it's not for social networking. It's for purposes of gathering a bunch of people for shared interest. So an example of a shared interest may be something like maybe they have a series of favorite animals. Maybe this is an animal lover website. So let's say let's find all users who have a favorite animal, and that animal's name is let's say elephant. So this right here will find all of the users who have a favorite animal who is elephant. And I can just do this fetch loop and echo and echo the index field, which is just a shortcut method to the actual index field of the user, which is user, I believe, user login or user display name.
And just to clarify what Scott's doing here, favorite animal would be a type of relationship field, either a custom pick or a relationship to another content type.
Yeah. So in this case, users is for this example, we'll call it a meta-based pod. We have not extended this user object with its own table, so each of the individual custom fields that are just custom fields are stored in meta. And then each of the relationships, in this case, we've got the favorite animal, and that is a relationship to I'm going to call it a pod, but this could actually even be a term, because .name will work for terms as well.
Scott, to illustrate the difference, can we presuppose that favorite animal is actually just a text input, so it's a meta field? Can you show how that would change?
Okay, so if it's a text input, it would be something like this. I'm going to say favorite animal custom, because maybe theirs isn't in the list. And let's say that is a custom field. And now we have our meta value check here. So it's the field name dot meta value. And the .meta value isn't something we made up. It's something related to MySQL that is specific to the user meta table. We do all the extra joins. We do all the hard work of limiting it to each user's ID. So we do all the hard work, and all you have to do is just say the field name dot meta value, and we will go through and find this part. We'll parse it out of the query that you've set here in the where, and we'll do the joins based off of this. We'll be using the meta key favorite animal custom, and that's the field name, but it doesn't have to be the field label. So it could be favorite animal other or something like that. So there's an example of looking up a term, a custom field, and you can even do, for example, a
Hey, Scott, while you're fixing that, when you're saying term, you actually mean taxonomy, right? Because I think a lot of people don't actually know that.
Yeah, terms taxonomies is ubiquitous. It's very similar in what people use to describe what taxonomies are. So a taxonomy is an actual content type split up, basically like a category, a tag, and then really when you say an individual item from the taxonomy, when people think about categories and category, what category is really a term from the category taxonomy. So that's a great singular version of it, term, which applies to all terms within all taxonomies within WordPress itself. You'll see term used a lot in the API for WordPress, like WP insert term and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check to see. I'm going to do another check. So first of all, let's see if anyone who has a favorite animal named elephant, or maybe it's a custom value, let's say a different one since elephantus is not actually in the list. And then let's also see if we can find any favorite animals who may actually be, and in this case, let's go ahead and say that I'm going to do this in a different way here. So I'm able to split this up by a parentheses. So both of these, this is SQL, so it's a little more complex and maybe you need it. But what I'm going to do here is just show you an example of how we would limit this to only favorite animals who are active. So in this case, this is advanced content type. So favorite animal dot active equals 1. That'll work. If active was actually let's say if favorite animal was a taxonomy, they don't have a term meta table. So what you could do here is extend a taxonomy with pods to add custom fields, which creates its own table. And as you see in the find reference, when you have a term field that is a custom field, we are referencing our custom table. And that's not T dot, because T dot is referencing the actual taxonomy table, but it's going to be D dot. So in this case, let's pretend like this is a term. So favorite animal hooks us up to the related favorite animals. .d will traverse automatically into the table for the custom fields for that term taxonomy. And then active is a field inside the custom fields table. Now if this, let's suppose this was a post type. And if that was the case, we don't have to change anything here because we still have meta value available for custom fields for post types. And in this case, we have a different thing we can do here. So now, instead of .d dot, we're using a meta-based post type. We would just reference meta value. So favorite animal is a post type relationship field on the user pod. Active is a custom field on the favorite animal post type. And we just have to be sure to affix .meta underscore value to this in order for it to understand that it's looking up a custom field on that post type. And it'll do all of the joining, of course, automatically. And this actually goes as many levels deep as you want. So let's say favorite animal, related animals, and active, let's say color. Yeah, green. So
Scott.
in this case, you could do multiple levels of traversal. Favorite animal, so you're finding all users who have a favorite animal who has a related animal with the color green. So you can do some really complex things, and it goes down as far as you need it to, and it automatically handles all of that traversal for you, and that is a very, very big part of what Pods does, and it makes it so much easier to do things.
Scott, can I make 2 requests?
Sure.
One, when you're going to go 4 traversals deep, I think you need the inception noise.
Yeah.
And 2, can you move on to the custom post type example, but give us an example when we're talking, start with both a meta value from a custom post type, but then a related, go into a relationship to another post type that has a relationship to another post type.
Sure.
Because I see this a lot with our users is people who essentially have a central post type that's got a relationship going both ways to it. For example, an events pod.
Sure. So
Right.
let's.
So we've got speakers related to it, and then we've got event series related to it. So it's books events is in the center, but then we have these 2 next to each other.
Right. Go ahead and just explain that one again. So we have what in that? You have
Let's say we have an event called we have our pod is called event, and so we want to get all events where we have a relationship field called speaker. So we want to get where all speakers equals Jim.
Okay.
So that's a relationship field. So we would use, right, in our speakers post type, it makes sense to use post title for their names. There's no need to have a custom field for that. But what if we wanted to see all speakers who were part of the speaker series Jim True Presents? So now we have to do another level of traversal. See, that's pretty neat,
Yeah, so
actually.
we got the speaker relationship field, we have the speaker series relationship field inside of the speaker pod, and then we have the post title to reference the title of that post. So, and just another gotcha, this is not the name of the pod itself. It could be different, it could be prefixed somehow, but this is the name of the relationship field itself. So we're referencing the relationship field name for speaker, the relationship field name for the speaker series on that speaker pod, and then the post title field on that post title.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Do we have other questions on things that Jim, things that you can do with Pods Find params, especially where before we move on to some of the other things it can do?
My microphone was muted. Sorry about that.
I'll forget it.
I think you've actually answered most of the ones that I had on here because it was basically a question about how and when to use the meta name syntax. And that's only when you're dealing with specifically, or the meta value syntax, that is specifically with WordPress fields or just CPTs, right?
Right. Well, if it's a meta storage.
If it's meta storage.
So a post type could be using meta storage. That's its default. If you don't know if you're using meta storage, you are.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with users, right? Users have a users meta table built into WordPress. And I recommend that everybody go into PHPMyAdmin once and look at how the WordPress post meta table is organized to see that it's not post ID 1, all of the meta fields. It's meta ID whatever, post ID 1, meta key, meta value, post ID 1, next meta key.
There be monsters there. No.
It's worth understanding conceptually, and then sticking to the built-in API so you never actually have to think about that. Right?
Okay.
I mean, this is why we're using WordPress and pods and things like that.
And I think one of the other questions I had, which was actually one from me, was do you have to use the T prefix, or can you get to relational field data with just related field name and current pod dot name in other pod? So like pretty much what you've done the traversal here. How often do you actually have to use the T?
You generally don't use T with long traversals because T is keeping you in the current table. So if it's post type, T dot equals the fields that you would get from like get post.
Okay.
So T dot post title equals hello world.
Okay.
So for a term, you want to get term ID 7,
Mm-hmm.
you would do T dot term ID. But if it's a custom field, that's not available in the post table.
Okay.
So T isn't going to help you.
All right.
It gets tricky with advanced content types because with advanced content types, it's the complete opposite of how WordPress normally does it. Mm-hmm. You have one row, one item. You start with pod ID, pod item ID, and then you have each one of those fields. So unless it's a relationship field, it's all T dot.
Okay.
Right, a custom field of a advanced content type is T dot, the name of that custom field, unless it's a pick field.
Okay. Thank you. Those were actually the most of the questions I had right there. We're not ready for talking about things like any kind of specific SQL syntaxy type questions, are we?
Scott, do you want to talk about that?
Um, I think so. So in terms of SQL syntax, when you're dealing with find, you'll find out with custom fields that your custom fields aren't actually stored as the data types that you intend them to be. So if they're a number, they're not actually a number like a decimal. If they're a date, they're actually not a date. They're all stored as something we call in MySQL as long text. And that's a big long text field inside the database. It treats it as text. So when you sort by it, when you filter by it, it's actually very limited. You are unable to do a sort by a currency value, for instance, so that one will appear first, then it'll be $20 will appear second, and then $3 will appear third. So it doesn't quite make sense. So you'll want to be sure to cast. We have a nice little code library that snippet that Josh made that he can show off. It's a pretty cool, great use thing, and it's actually something that WordPress core does itself. Now there is something we did not actually cover here in our where examples, and that is the fact that you can actually use a WP query meta query syntax for this. So I wanted to show that if we have a moment. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, you do, Scott. Thank you. And actually, that's one of the questions that came up on the Slack chat, so perfect time to go into that.
Sure. All right, so let's just keep it to the event post type. And I'm just going to go ahead and do what I did here in meta query syntax. So we're going to send it an array. And as you know in meta query, this is if you look up wquery inside of the WordPress docs, you'll find all sorts of information. But look specifically under meta_query. There's lots of stuff in there. And we support everything. So this works for post types. This works for taxonomies. This works for everything. So you don't actually have, you're not passing in just meta fields. You're passing in object fields. You're passing in anything that is a field that Pods is aware of. So it's the same exact type of syntax, except in this case, you're not actually having a prefix or a fix. So instead of t dot, you would just do like that. And instead of we do that. So we're already building this out pretty quickly. Check to see if the ID is a number.
And does that imply like ors or ands when you do like
and so by default, what does WP query meta query do? It is relation and. So if we want to do this, we would do this or.
Perfect. Thank you.
And so let's get, so instead of using meta value here, we would just put in the field custom field name and say some value. And now inside of the speaker, we could say Jim, and let's bring back the post series stuff we did. So there's speaker series true presents. Now this accepts compare operations too. So you can say compare like, and that will work. So anything that contains Jim, for instance, that would work. And Jim or Josh, I don't know if you want to just show the WP query meta query docs or at all or not. I've still got my code up
We're
here.
going to include those in the show notes when we actually post this back on the web. So we're going to pull out things where we actually talk about specific docs and specific other links, and we're actually going to include those in the show notes after this.
Right, and I will include a link to the WP meta query docs specifically for that because they all apply. Why don't we move into order by? I think we've pretty well covered where.
Real quick one on that one. What are some of the compare operators like there that you can use?
So in here, I mean, this is of course based off of MySQL syntax, so you could do that here as well in the normal part. But inside the WP query meta query syntax for where, you can actually do things like compare. You can also do equals. Let's do this. So you can do equals. You can actually do not equals. You can do for a number like this. Do it like that. Also do.
And are these all documented within the WP Query
Yep.
codex?
Yep. We are depending on that in terms of leaning on the documentation for that for people to understand how it works. We should definitely consider adding it to our docs as well to make it
Yeah,
known.
definitely. No, it's a good idea. What about if you needed to, like in that case with the light, typically you're putting a percent mark on the area where you want it to do the comparison like at?
Mhm.
Where would you put that for the, like your comparison? I like the percentage key at the beginning or the end of like your value.
Right. So I can actually look and see what we're doing there. I don't.
Is that well? Is that in my experience with WP Query that is not necessary? Though I could be
Not?
full of it.
It's just automatically assumed that it's going to be on both sides.
Because doesn't it run WPDB sanitize leg on that? If it's a
Um,
WP Query.
it. I don't see any cases here that actually has any percent usage inside their documentation. But I can find out here.
I'm like I don't know the exact answer. I'm just saying that with WP Query, knowing that I did it the other day, just changing that to like runs a like comparison. It does
Okay.
not require those escape characters that you would use in
In MySQL, yeah.
in my SQL. Now, am I wrong? Like, should you be listening to this and be like, Josh, you're wrong. You need to run WPDB's
We can
escape like query method on that? Probably.
we can pull that one out for a research item to look at after
Yeah.
We
for the
do.
show
We do
notes.
escape like.
Okay.
We do it inside of pods.
Yes, we do inside of pods. Now you can
Well, that
turn
was
that
nice
off.
of us.
Okay.
You can turn that off by disabling sanitize. So if you say, in this case, let's say you want to find anyone that has Jim true, so anyone with a
Like a specific match.
yeah, and you can do
I
that.
get
And
you.
what you would have to say is sanitize false.
Okay. We had a question about using in and not in, the SQL in, which basically looks within like a list of items. But SQL has a very specific syntax for that particular format, which is like, parentheses, list item,
Right.
comma, list item, list item, list item. How do we handle that within the SQL ins
In
like
a
that?
normal where clause where you're not doing the meta query,
Hmm.
it's a known issue. You can't do it. You
Right.
have to like just string them together with ands
Okay.
or ors, depending on how you're doing it. I don't know, honestly, in this type of syntax that Scott is doing now.
So we should definitely be sure. So the way that in works is in our metaquery syntax, it automatically handles it, so it expects an array, and if you don't pass it an array, it'll just assume it creates an array out of it. But so what it does is, in this case, I have a speaker list. I'm going to see find me all speakers who are in this list. So I'm doing compare in, and then I'm just passing an array. So what this does is just checks all of the values and parses them together into this SQL syntax. Now, there's something you can't do. It's a relationship, and what we can't do is, and actually, I should say this is speaker name. I'm sorry, I mistyped that. So we're looking for all speakers with the actually post title. Sorry, post title because it's a post type, and we're going to find all speakers with the name of Jim, Phil, Josh, or Scott. Now, in this case, we can't say find me all post with a speaker that has Jim, Phil, Josh, and Scott. We can't do in all. So there's no way to do that in MySQL currently because of it's a joined table. That's something we're working on, looking into, figuring out how we can do automatically by doing some extra work in the parsing front. But currently, this is just not possible.
And just to clarify before we move on, what you've shown here is the ability I want posts where either Jim's the title, Phil's the title, Josh is the title, or Scott's the title. And using this advanced syntax, this meta query syntax, we're actually able to do that, which we wouldn't by just using the syntax that we started with originally. The syntax where you just write this dot this equals this. We would not
Yeah,
be able to, with this syntax, we would not actually be able to do an in there.
we would be if we did just
It doesn't work, Scott.
standard. If we did standard.
Oh,
So,
you mean like an actual
and
standard, like with SQL in, and then did it like that? Yes, that's correct. We had to escape it all.
Mhm.
Yeah, because that's true SQL in syntax there. So we're actually passing it
Mhm.
over. The other one's being created by the meta value.
so that works. It just doesn't. You can't say it has like find me all events that have maybe speaker is a multiple select. I find that often people want to check for events that have both selected. So if it was like, I mean, there's no way to do all. That just is not supported in MySQL currently.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's basically going to pull back anything that actually matches anything within the set.
Any
Correct.
with Jim or Josh, but
Right.
it won't do Jim and Josh. Yeah, and
Okay.
even
Got
if you
it.
wanted to say post title equals Jim and post title equals Josh, that just won't work.
Right. That makes sense. That would be one of those kind of things where you'd have to do like we did before, where you had the two comparison operators and did Jim and Josh separate lines. They're like two completely separate queries to make them both match. Got it. We're actually looking at our time when we want to make sure that we get into order by and caching.
Yeah. Let me show my screen, if Scott, if you can end yours, because I have that example you referenced earlier with order by.
Sure.
And we can go through order by very quickly because it actually builds off this stuff that we talked about with syntax, as far as the, not syntax, as far as prefixing goes. This, by the way, is in our pods code library, which is github.com/pods framework pods code library. And so order by uses that same, exactly the same logic when you're reading that chart. You need to prefix it so pods knows what table to look in. But as Scott mentioned, all fields in WordPress, all custom fields are strings. And so,
Sorry, Josh, don't mean to interrupt you. Increase your text size again.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, what I ended up doing was I took my window, I shared just the window, not the screen, and then I made the window smaller. And then
Okay.
that would actually resolve the whole sizing issue. It wouldn't even have to be even like an
Okay.
issue.
It's
For
all a
next
matter
time.
of size.
So, yeah, that's fair, Jim. I'll accept that. So this can create issues. Let's say if you're sorting by a field that's got decimals, by default, it's going to sort them in alphabetical order. So you're not going to see them as if they're numbers. You're going to see that dot's going to screw up your ordering. And that's where the cast comes in. This is an example that you can see where, in this case, we're sorting a number field called product price. So it's that same kind of, okay, this is a custom field in a meta storage pod. So I do product price, that's the name of the field, dot meta value. But what I'm doing is I am casting it as a decimal. So even though it is a string in the database, so it's 10.00 in 10.25, right? Those aren't going to sort properly versus, say, 12. In this case, we are casting it as a decimal. So that way, when we actually do the sort, it treats it exactly as you would expect, a number with a decimal. And so that's an advanced use of order by. But order by is very important. It's why I wanted to touch on it before we left, because we have defaults in there. So for post types, it's going to sort by post created date. The name field, for advanced content types, it sorts by the date created. But that's not always what you want. Oftentimes you want to do order by post title, to do it in alphabetical order by post title. And that same logic that we were talking about before is going to cover how you build these. If you want to order by the post title, you're going to say t.post title, exactly the same way that we went through that chart. Just as you've seen here with product price, the name of the custom field, what type of field, it's a meta field.
Hey, Josh, are any of those documented, those defaults documented anywhere on the documentation at present?
No, that's an excellent question, Jim.
Okay.
Josh, why aren't they? I don't know. I'm just a man. Leave me alone.
No, I'm just thinking that's actually a good one to actually document because it would be very helpful, I think.
Yes. Put it on my to-do.
Already did.
See, this is why Jim is awesome. But so order by is neat because once you understand that syntaxing from the big green chart that we started with, that helps you understand how where queries work and those traversals work, you can apply exactly what you've learned to your order bys. The only catch is remembering that if it's a if it's a number field, you often need to cast it. Same thing with dates. You need to cast as dates. And that's just a standard cast as a function of MySQL. And I have a link in here to the docs for casting. Um, Scott, should we talk about caching before we go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a great thing because a major thing when you're dealing with finding data sets and doing lots of query limiting and all that stuff is if you've got persistent caching enabled, or even if you want to use transients, you can find it very, very useful to not be querying the database every single load for something that only changes maybe once every day, or maybe it's once every couple days or whatever. So what you can do is you simply just add a cache variable inside of your find parameters, and it's pretty useful. It supports sorry, the cache parameter is cache underscore mode, and it supports cache, which is using object caching, transient, or site dash transient, which is for multi-site. Now, the way that we have that structured is by default it's cache, and I would always recommend just keeping it cache if you've got persistent cache. Transients can just fill out the database. Even if you have object caching on, it'll take and store it as object cache, but it's just usually better to use cache versus transients. Of course, it depends on the use case. So there are use cases that are valid for transients. But
What's
this
the
is a lot
difference
of data.
between, I'm sorry to jump in there, but what are transients as we're referring to them here?
Sure. Transients, by default inside of WordPress, are a way to create a set of stored data that are only valid for a certain limited amount of time, or aren't specifically needed. Like, for instance, when you update your WordPress site, all your transients are cleared. And oftentimes when you run pods clear cache, because you have issues with something appearing on the site that may not need to, it will clear out all those transients as well. So transients are usually stored in the database. Now, if you have object caching enabled, what that does is it stores it in the object cache instead for most of the object caching modules that are out there. But you could do cache mode, and I guess we move on. Expires is the number you'll want to set. By default, it's null, so that means no caching at all. So regardless if you set cache mode, expires is null and you won't get caching. So you have to set expires to something. If you set it to if you set it to expires to 0, the integer 0, what that will do is it'll keep it forever until caches are cleared through a WordPress update, or when you clear pods cache, or if you have object caching, if you clear out the object cache. And then any number 1 and above will cache it for that amount of seconds. So something like 3,600 will cache it for, what is that, 30 minutes, 15 minutes?
Right. And if I actually have an example of this up, and it shows you how to use the constants that define time amounts.
Yeah.
Can we switch to me, Jim?
I think we are switched to you now, Josh.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
So this is another example in our code library that shows you how to use that expires. Right. The default for cache mode is objects. This is automatically to use object. What's cool about is that Scott was talking about you need to set your expires in amounts of seconds, and then you have to like do math and stuff. WordPress has these constants set up for you already that define amounts of time in seconds, but they tell that they're readable. So day in seconds, hours in seconds, minute in seconds. There's a link here to the Codex article for that. So this is another example of a pods find parameter set where it's again where, so this is a Jedi pod. So let's find Jedi whose home planet, this is a custom field, is Corellia, the whole world of Han Solo. And I observe EU canon, so and his children are Jedi from there. Han Solo, of course, not a Jedi, but his children are. And in this case, we want to make sure that we cache this just for a day. But we could say minute and second, hours and seconds. And it's as simple as saying expires, and then just use one of those constants. So that way we don't have to do the math to figure out 3,600, 360, whatever those are. And then we just pass it right down to that pods function. Pods equals pods, pod name, parameters, just like we've always done.
It's also really important to note that cache is not indefinite. Cache may go away if you have too much into cache, so things will get chopped off. Uh, Cache is limited by your hosting, so if you have some hosts have really small cache amounts, some hosts have bigger, some hosts require you to have like your own servers for caching and have like gigabytes of however much cache you need. So it's important to note that because if you cache everything on your site, you're not caching everything on your site if you're on certain hosts because it'll just you cache something and it takes something out of the cache. It's not available in the next load, so you're just continuously loading things into cache, and that actually increases the page load time because it has to send it out and get it so often that just increases the milliseconds it takes to run each of those requests. So just be watchful for that when you're dealing with cache.
And this is where the query monitors plugin comes into account, I think, because it gives you the time and the number of queries. Because caching is going to limit your number of queries, but doesn't limit the amount of time that it takes, right? That's the real metric that you want to look at. So caching is almost always going to reduce the queries, but is it going to reduce the time? I don't know. I can't tell you in your specific use case. You need to test it. Do science. Do heavy caching, test the time with query monitors or a similar plugin. Do full page test with PingDom. Disable caching. Do it again. See which one works best for you.
Yeah, and there are cases where there are MySQL databases or other database engines who actually have caching set up on the database server itself. So when you do queries, it'll pull from its own cache, and oftentimes that can be a lot quicker than hitting an external caching server apart from MySQL and your web server. So yeah, you have to definitely weigh those things and check with your systems administrator if you have one.
Yeah, I mean that's the
For
thing
the
with WordPress is like we've pushed cache all the things, and assuming caching is better. It may or may not be. You always need to test, but it's a cool thing that's built right into your pods object.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're running up on the end of our time window here, and we have actually answered most of the questions folks have actually given us. We, of course, will continue to take questions through our Twitter feed and through Slack chat, and we'll answer them after the show. Josh, were you asking a question, or are you just moving your cat out of the way?
Yeah, that's my cat's tail. She's on her shelf.
Okay. No
I
problem.
work to keep her bed warm. Which,
Yeah, there you go.
I also call MacBook Pro.
So I guess this would be the stupid pets tricks, right?
Yeah, did I? That or the musical guest, one of the two.
Yeah, well, I don't want to hear your cat make any music, okay? So our next episode is in 2 weeks on March 17th, 2015 at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll be talking about relationships in pods and visually mapping your data. You can find archives of our show at our website at http://pods.io podscast. That page is not there yet, but will be by tomorrow. And also on our YouTube channel, which we will link in the show notes for this particular blog entry at youtube.com/user/podsframework. Once this podcast is finished, it'll automatically upload to YouTube. We want to thank everyone for joining us today for our very first podcast, and we look forward to your questions and comments for the next one in 2 weeks. Thank everybody for coming.
Thanks, everyone.